The envelope in my mailbox had that official HOA letterhead that always made my stomach sink. And when I opened it to find a $300 fine for excessive chimney smoke, I knew my peaceful life in the Pine Ridge subdivision was about to get a whole lot more complicated. I stood there in my driveway, reading the notice for the third time, my breath visible in the cold January air. The letter was signed by Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president who had moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago and immediately made it her mission to turn our quiet Montana community into some kind of pristine magazine photo shoot. According to her formal complaint, my wood-burning fireplace was producing excessive smoke that violated Section 8.4 of the HOA bylaws regarding air quality standards. The thing that really got me was the hypocrisy of it all. I had been living in Pine Ridge for 7 years, long before Patricia and her crew took over the HOA board. My house sat on 2 acres at the edge of the subdivision, right up against state forest land. I had been burning firewood from my property every winter since I moved in, and nobody had said a word about it until now. In fact, most of my neighbors bought their firewood from me. I had a small side business cutting and selling seasoned wood, and during the harsh Montana winters, I supplied about 15 families in Pine Ridge with the cords they needed to keep their own fireplaces and wood stoves burning. I walked back inside, tossing the notice onto my kitchen counter. My golden retriever, Cooper, looked up from his bed near the fireplace, where a nice fire was currently crackling away. The irony was not lost on me that the very thing keeping my house warm on this 15-degree morning was now apparently a criminal offense in Patricia's eyes. My phone rang. It was Tom Watkins, my neighbor from 3 houses down. "Hey Adam, did you get one of those ridiculous letters from the HOA?" Tom asked, sounding annoyed. "Just rate it. $300 for having smoke come out of my chimney in Montana in January. That's insane." She sent letters to 5 other people too, anyone who has been using their fireplace regularly. She's claiming we are all violating some air quality standard that nobody even knew existed. "Did she fine you too?" I asked. "Yep, $200 for me." "I guess you got the premium package since you sell firewood. She probably thinks you are running some kind of industrial operation out there." I rubbed my temples. This is ridiculous. We are allowed to use our fireplaces. It is not like we are burning trash or creating some environmental disaster. It is just regular wood smoke. I know, but you know Patricia. Once she gets something in her head, she does not let it go. Remember last summer when she tried to ban basketball hoops in driveways? I did remember. Patricia had argued that portable basketball hoops were unsightly and diminished property values. She had backed down only after 3/4 of the neighborhood signed a petition against her. But this felt different. This felt personal, especially given that the fine for me was higher than everyone else's. After hanging up with Tom, I decided to call Patricia directly. I had her number from the HOA directory, though I had never used it before. I generally tried to avoid unnecessary contact with her. She answered on the 4th ring. "Patricia Hendricks speaking." "Hi Patricia, this is Adam Jennings from 445 Timber Lane. I just received a fine from the HOA about my fireplace smoke." "Oh yes, Mr. Jennings, I am glad you called. This is a matter we take very seriously. I am trying to understand what exactly I did wrong. I have been using my fireplace the same way for 7 years. "Well, Mr. Jennings, just because something has been happening for years does not make it acceptable. The HOA bylaws clearly state that no homeowner shall create excessive smoke or odors that affect the enjoyment of neighboring properties. Your chimney produces visible smoke on a daily basis. Patricia, Everyone's chimney produces visible smoke when they burn wood. That is how fireplaces work. The temperature difference between the hot smoke and cold air makes it visible. Be that as it may, several residents have complained. Which residents? I asked, pretty sure I knew the answer. I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. But the complaints are legitimate, and the board has voted to issue these fines. If you wish to appeal, you can submit a written request to appear at next month's HOA meeting. And in the meantime, I am supposed to just pay $300 for using my fireplace normally. That is correct. The fine is due within 30 days. And Mr. Jennings, I should mention that continued violations will result in increased fines. We expect all residents to comply with HOA regulations. The way she said it, so formal and cold, made my blood pressure rise, but I kept my cool. I will see you at next month's meeting then. The meeting is February 15th at 7 p.m. in the community center. Good day, Mr. Jennings. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, wondering how things had gotten so absurd. Cooper came over and nudged my hand with his nose, sensing my frustration. That evening, I went out to my woodshed to take inventory. I had about 12 cords of split and seasoned firewood stacked neatly under the covered structure I had built. Most of it was already spoken for. I had regular customers who depended on me for their winter supply, and I prided myself on providing quality wood at fair prices. The wood came from dead trees on my property and the adjacent forest land where I had a permit to harvest. It was good, clean burning pine and fir, properly dried for at least a year before selling. Among my regular customers were Dave and Jennifer Morrison, Patricia's next-door neighbors. They had a beautiful stone fireplace that they used almost every evening. I had delivered 2 cords to them back in October, and they had already texted me asking if I had more available. I also supplied wood to the Carters, the Williamson family, the Rodriguezes, and about 10 other households in Pine Ridge. As I stood there in the cold, looking at my neatly stacked wood, an idea started forming in my mind. Patricia wanted to fine me for chimney smoke. She wanted to make my life difficult over something as natural and normal as burning wood in a fireplace during a Montana winter. Well, 2 could play that game. The next morning, I started making phone calls. I called every single one of my firewood customers in Pine Ridge. The conversation was basically the same each time. Hey, this is Adam. I wanted to give you a heads up that I am not going to be able to supply firewood anymore to addresses within Pine Ridge subdivision. I am getting hassled by the HOA about smoke from my chimney, and I have decided it is not worth the trouble to continue selling to people in the neighborhood. I will still sell to folks outside the subdivision, but I am drawing a line at the Pine Ridge boundary. The reactions were mixed but mostly negative toward the HOA, not me. Everyone understood my position, especially those who had also received fines. Tom Watkins actually laughed when I told him. "That is brilliant," he said. "Patricia burns wood too, you know. She has one of those fancy wood stove inserts. I bet she buys from you." "I do not think she does. I have never delivered to her address." "Well, she gets it from somewhere. This is going to make things interesting." By the end of the day, I had notified all my Pine Ridge customers. A few of them were disappointed but understanding. Most of them were annoyed at Patricia and the HOA board for creating this situation. And a couple of them mentioned that they knew other people who would probably be scrambling to find firewood now, since we were only halfway through winter and most folks had not stocked up enough to last until spring. The next week, I attended the monthly HOA meeting. The community center was more crowded than usual, probably because word had spread about the fireplace fines. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members. Carol Simmons, the vice president, Frank Chen, the treasurer, and two at-large members whose names I could never remember. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through the usual boring updates about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. Finally, she got to new business. As many of you are aware, the board has issued citations for air quality violations related to excessive fireplace smoke. This decision was not made lightly, but after receiving complaints and reviewing the bylaws, we determined that action was necessary. A hand shot up in the back. It was Maria Rodriguez, who complained. Because I have been burning wood in my fireplace for 4 years, and nobody ever said anything until now. Patricia's expression tightened. As I mentioned to others who have inquired, we do not disclose the identity of complainants, but I assure you the complaints were legitimate. I think that is convenient, someone else called out. How do we know anyone actually complained? Maybe you just decided you do not like fireplace smoke. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Patricia banged her gavel, which she had recently purchased and seemed to enjoy using way too much. Order, please. The board operates with full transparency within the bounds of privacy protections. If you wish to challenge your fine, you may submit an appeal in writing. I raised my hand, and Patricia reluctantly acknowledged me. Adam Jennings, 445 Timber Lane. I want to understand the specific bylaw that we supposedly violated. I have read Section 8.4 and it mentions excessive smoke or odors, but it does not define what excessive means. Normal fireplace operation produces smoke. How are we supposed to know what crosses the line into excessive? Patricia shuffled some papers. The board uses reasonable judgment in these matters. So it is subjective. You just decide based on your personal opinion what is excessive. The board collectively makes these determinations based on the standards expected in a quality residential community. That is not an answer, Tom Watkins called out. You are fining people hundreds of dollars based on your vague interpretation of a vague rule. That does not seem right. The meeting devolved into a heated discussion, with more than half the room arguing against the fines and Patricia becoming increasingly defensive. She kept banging her gavel and calling for order, but people were genuinely upset. Finally, she announced that the board would take all feedback under consideration and revisit the matter at the next meeting. But the fines remained in place, and payment was still due within 30 days. After the meeting, several people approached me in the parking lot. Jennifer Morrison looked worried. Adam, Dave said you are not selling firewood in Pine Ridge anymore. Is that true? It is. I am tired of the HOA hassling me about my chimney when all I am doing is using my fireplace normally. So I decided to simplify things and stop selling to anyone in the subdivision. But we are almost out. We only have enough wood left for maybe 2 more weeks. I am sorry, Jennifer. There are other suppliers around. You will have to find someone else. Who? You are the only person selling firewood locally. Everyone else we have found wants way more money and they are at least 30 minutes away. I shrugged. Not my problem anymore. Take it up with Patricia. Over the next 2 weeks, I started hearing rumblings through the neighborhood grapevine. Several families were running low on firewood and discovering what Jennifer had said was true. The nearest alternative suppliers were either expensive, far away, or both. One guy charged nearly double what I had been charging. Another supplier was so far out that the delivery fee made it prohibitively costly. A few people tried to buy wood from big box stores, but those bundles were ridiculously overpriced and did not last long. Tom told me that Patricia herself had called him asking if he knew where to get firewood. Apparently, she was running low and had been unable to find a good source. Tom had taken great pleasure in telling her that Adam Jennings used to supply the whole neighborhood, but had stopped because of the HOA fines. "You should have seen her face," Tom said, laughing. "Well, I did not see it because we were on the phone, but I could hear the realization in her voice. She had no idea you were the Firewood guy for half the neighborhood." "That is her problem," I said. "I am done being the neighborhood's firewood source if they are going to fine me for burning it myself." Meanwhile, I was still selling plenty of wood to customers outside Pine Ridge. I had buyers from the neighboring subdivisions and from rural properties scattered around the valley. Business was actually better because I was not spending time on the smaller, less profitable deliveries to my immediate neighbors. February rolled around, and the temperatures dropped even further. We had a cold snap that pushed nighttime lows down to 5 below zero. During weather like that, a fireplace or wood stove was not just nice to have, it was practically necessary. Electric heating bills in Montana during cold snaps could get astronomical. Wood heat was economical and reliable. I kept my own fireplace burning steadily, and yes, smoke came out of my chimney. Patricia could fine me all she wanted, but I was not about to freeze or pay triple my normal heating bill just to appease her absurd interpretation of HOA rules. I had not paid the $300 fine. I had no intention of paying it. Let her take me to court if she wanted. I had consulted with a lawyer friend who told me the HOA's case was shaky at best. The bylaw was vague. There was no clear standard for what constituted excessive smoke, and I had been engaging in the same behavior for years without issue. If it came to a legal fight, I would probably win. The day before the February HOA meeting, I got a knock on my door. It was Dave Morrison, looking uncomfortable. "Hey, Adam, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure, come on in." He stepped inside and Cooper immediately went to greet him. Dave absent-mindedly petted the dog while clearly working up the nerve to say something. "Look, I know you are dealing with the HOA thing, and I completely understand why you are not selling firewood in Pine Ridge anymore. But Jennifer and I are really in a bind. We are almost completely out, and we cannot find a decent supplier. Is there any way you would make an exception for us?" "We will pay extra." I felt bad for Dave. He was a good guy and this was not his fault, but I had made my decision. "I am sorry, Dave, I really am. But if I make an exception for you, then I have to make exceptions for everyone, and I am back to where I started. The whole point is that I am not supplying firewood to Pine Ridge addresses anymore. What are we supposed to do? It is going to be below freezing for at least another 6 weeks. There are other suppliers. I know they are more expensive and less convenient, but they exist. We called 4 different places. 1 is booked solid, 2 charge way more than you did, and the 4th guy never called us back. That is unfortunate, but it is not my responsibility. You should talk to Patricia about it. This whole situation exists because of her." Dave left looking defeated, and I felt a twinge of guilt. But I reminded myself that I was not the one who had created this mess. Patricia had decided to enforce a ridiculous interpretation of a vague rule, and now people were experiencing the consequences. The February 15th HOA meeting was even more packed than the last one. I arrived a few minutes early and found a seat in the 3rd row. Patricia looked tense as she arranged papers at the front table. When 7 o'clock hit, she banged her gavel and called the meeting to order. "Before we begin with regular business, I know there are several appeals to discuss regarding the fireplace citations issued last month." "Actually," I said, standing up, "I have a different matter to address first." I formally request that the board clarify the specific, objective standards that define excessive smoke under Section 8.4 of the bylaws. As currently written, the rule is too vague to be enforceable. Patricia frowned. Mr. Jennings, that is not on the agenda. I am making it part of the agenda. According to HOA rules, any homeowner can raise an issue during the open forum portion of the meeting. She looked annoyed but nodded. Very well. The board's position is that excessive smoke is determined on a case-by-case basis using reasonable judgment. That is not a standard. That is just you making arbitrary decisions. If I burn a fire tonight and you decide it is too smoky, you fine me. If someone else burns a fire that produces the exact same amount of smoke but you do not notice or do not care, they are fine. That is not fair or reasonable. Carol Simmons, the vice president, leaned forward. Mr. Jennings, what exactly are you proposing? I am proposing that either the board establishes clear, measurable standards for what constitutes excessive smoke, or you acknowledge that the current rule is unenforceable and rescind all the fines. The fines stand, Patricia said firmly. And if you do not pay within the deadline, we will pursue collection action. Good luck with that. I have consulted with an attorney, and he says you do not have a legal leg to stand on. The room erupted in conversation. Several people started talking at once, some supporting me, others asking questions. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Finally, Frank Chen, the treasurer, spoke up. Patricia, maybe we should consider what Adam is saying. If the rule is not clearly defined, we could have problems enforcing it legally. The rule is fine, Patricia insisted. People are just looking for excuses to avoid accountability. Accountability for what? Maria Rodriguez called out. For using our fireplaces in winter. That is ridiculous. Another voice chimed in. This whole thing is ridiculous. And now we cannot even buy firewood locally because Adam stopped selling it in Pine Ridge because of you, Patricia. Patricia's face reddened. Mr. Jennings's business decisions are not the HOA's concern. They are when your arbitrary fines caused him to make those decisions, Tom Watkins said. Half the neighborhood bought firewood from Adam. Now we are all scrambling to find alternatives that cost twice as much. This is a direct result of your overreach. If people are struggling to find firewood, perhaps they should consider alternative heating methods that do not produce smoke, Patricia said. The room went silent for a moment, and then the noise level doubled. People were outraged. Someone yelled that electric heat was too expensive. Another person pointed out that wood stoves and fireplaces were specifically allowed in the HOA bylaws and had been a selling point for many homes in Pine Ridge. Jennifer Morrison stood up and said that she and Dave were considering moving out of the subdivision entirely if this was the kind of unreasonable governance they could expect. Patricia tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was clear she had lost the room. Even Carol Simmons looked uncomfortable, and Frank Chen was shaking his head. The two at-large board members were whispering to each other, glancing at Patricia with obvious concern. Finally, after 20 minutes of chaos, Patricia called for a recess. The board members huddled in the corner, having a heated discussion that everyone in the room tried to eavesdrop on. I could not hear everything, but I caught phrases like legal liability and public relations disaster. When they returned to the table, Carol Simmons spoke instead of Patricia. After discussing the matter, the board has decided to table the fireplace smoke issue pending further review. We will consult with the HOA's attorney to determine the best path forward. In the meantime, all fines are suspended. Suspended or rescinded? I asked. Carol hesitated. Suspended. We are not dismissing them yet, but collection is on hold until we have clarity on the legal standing. It was not a complete victory, but it was progress. The meeting continued with other mundane business, and I left feeling cautiously optimistic. Patricia had been forced to back down, at least temporarily, over the next week. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia was furious. She apparently felt undermined by the other board members and was convinced that I had orchestrated some kind of campaign against her. Which was not true. I had simply stood up for myself, and others had supported me because they agreed. But Patricia seemed to take everything personally. Then things took an interesting turn. A letter went out to all Pine Ridge residents from the HOA attorney. It was a formal legal opinion stating that Section 8.4 of the bylaws, as currently written, did not provide sufficient specificity to enforce penalties against normal fireplace use. The attorney recommended either amending the bylaw with clear, measurable standards or withdrawing the citations entirely. 2 days later, another letter arrived. All fines related to fireplace smoke were officially rescinded. The HOA apologized for any inconvenience and stated that the board would be working on clarifying the relevant bylaws with input from residents. I had one. Sort of. I was not going to be fined, and Patricia's overreach had been checked. But I still had no intention of going back to selling firewood in Pine Ridge. That decision had nothing to do with the fines anymore and everything to do with principle. Patricia had tried to push me around, and I was not going to reward that behavior by going back to business as usual. March arrived, and with it, more problems for Patricia. Several residents, emboldened by the successful pushback on the fireplace issue, started questioning other HOA decisions. Someone challenged the landscaping contract, pointing out that the company the HOA used charged significantly more than competitors. Another person raised concerns about how HOA funds were being spent, requesting a detailed financial audit. Frank Chen, to his credit, was transparent about the finances and provided documentation showing where the money went. Everything appeared to be above board, but the scrutiny made Patricia even more defensive and irritable. She started sending out more violation notices for minor issues like lawn maintenance and paint color approval, which only made residents more annoyed with her. Meanwhile, people were still asking me about firewood. Jennifer Morrison approached me in the grocery store parking lot, practically begging me to reconsider. "Adam, the fines are gone. Can you please start selling firewood in Pine Ridge again? We finally found a supplier, but he is charging us $250 a cord. You charged $150. I am not interested, Jennifer. It is not about the money. Then what is it about? It is about the fact that the HOA thought they could push me around. They cannot, and I am not going to forget what happened just because they backed down this time." She looked frustrated. "You are punishing all of us because of Patricia." "No, Patricia is punishing all of you. I am just running my business the way I see fit." It was a harsh conversation, but I meant what I said. My life was simpler without the Pine Ridge deliveries. I had less drama, fewer small orders, and better profit margins from my customers outside the subdivision. Why would I go back? In early April, I heard that Patricia was planning to run for re-election as HOA president. Elections were held every 2 years, and her term was up in May. From what I gathered, she had significant opposition. At least 3 other people had announced they were running against her, and sentiment in the neighborhood was decidedly anti-Patricia. Tom Watkins stopped by my house one evening with a 6-pack of beer and a proposition. "You should run for HOA president," he said, settling into one of my deck chairs. "Absolutely not. I have no interest in that drama." "Come on, you would win easily. Everyone knows you stood up to Patricia and people respect that. People also know I refuse to sell them firewood and let them scramble during the coldest part of winter. I am not exactly popular right now. You are more popular than Patricia, that is for sure. I shook my head. I do not want to be HOA president. I want to be left alone to live my life and run my business without interference. Getting involved in HOA politics is the opposite of that. Tom dropped the subject, but I could tell he was disappointed. I think he had visions of a complete overthrow of Patricia's regime, with me leading the charge. But that was not my style. I had made my point. The HOA had backed down. That was enough for me. The HOA election took place in mid-May. Patricia lost badly, getting only about 20% of the vote. A guy named Richard Paulson won. He was a retired engineer who had lived in Pine Ridge for 10 years and had a reputation for being reasonable and level-headed. In his campaign, he had promised to focus on essential services, minimize unnecessary rules, and operate the HOA with transparency and common sense. I voted for him, and I was glad when he won. Patricia did not even retain a board seat. She had run for re-election to the board itself, even after it became clear she would not win the presidency, but she lost that race too. It was a complete repudiation of her leadership. After the election, things in Pine Ridge calmed down significantly. Richard turned out to be exactly what he had promised: competent, reasonable, and low-key. He streamlined some of the HOA processes, cut costs on a few contracts, and generally made life easier for residents. Violation notices became rare and were issued only for genuinely problematic situations. But I still did not resume selling firewood in Pine Ridge. By that point, it had been months since I had made the decision, and I had built up a solid customer base outside the subdivision. I was making more money with less hassle, and I saw no reason to change course. Then, in late June, Richard Paulson knocked on my door. Cooper barked once, then wagged his tail when he saw who it was. Richard and I did not know each other well, but we had chatted a few times at neighborhood events. "Hey Adam, do you have a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what is up?" "I wanted to talk to you about firewood. I know you used to supply a lot of people in Pine Ridge, and I know you stopped because of the issues with Patricia and the old board. I am hoping you might reconsider now that things have changed." I invited him in, and we sat at my kitchen table. Richard was straightforward and respectful, which I appreciated. "Look, I understand why you made the decision you made," he said. "Patricia was out of line, and you had every right to respond the way you did. But the reality is that a lot of people in this neighborhood depended on you for affordable firewood. Without you, they are paying a lot more going without. I am asking, as a personal favor, if you would consider supplying Pine Ridge again." "Why should I?" I asked, not trying to be difficult but genuinely curious what his pitch was. "Because you are a good neighbor, and because the people who are suffering now are not the ones who caused the problem. Jennifer and Dave Morrison did not fine you. Maria Rodriguez did not fine you. They were on your side the whole time, but they are the ones paying double for firewood now." He had a point, and I knew it. I had been conflating the HOA as an institution with the individuals who lived in Pine Ridge. Most of my neighbors had supported me. They had spoken up at meetings, signed petitions, and voted Patricia out of office. Maybe it was time to let go of my grudge. If I do this, I need assurances that the HOA is not going to come after me again for some made-up violation. "You have my word that as long as I am president, the HOA will not hassle you about your fireplace or your firewood business, and if anyone tries, I will shut it down immediately. I can also put it in writing if that would make you feel better." "Put it in writing," I said. 2 days later, Richard delivered a letter on HOA letterhead. It stated that the board officially recognized my right to operate a small-scale firewood business from my property and to use my fireplace without interference, provided I complied with all applicable local, state, and federal regulations. It was signed by Richard and the other board members. It was more than I had expected, and it felt like a genuine olive branch, so I decided to give it a shot. I sent out an email to my old Pine Ridge customer list, letting them know I was resuming sales to addresses within the subdivision. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Within a week, I had orders for 8 cords and more kept coming in. Summer passed, and then fall arrived. I spent September and October cutting, splitting, and delivering firewood. It was good to be back in the routine, and I had to admit that I had missed some of my regular customers. Jennifer Morrison actually hugged me when I delivered her first cord of the season, which was a little awkward but also kind of nice. As winter approached, I kept an eye on my chimney smoke situation. Not because I was worried about the HOA, but because I was curious if Patricia would cause any more trouble. She was still living in Pine Ridge after all. I wondered if she would try to retaliate in some way, but she did not. In fact, I rarely saw her. When I did, she avoided eye contact and went out of her way to steer clear of me. It was a little odd, but I was not complaining. Then, in early December, something unexpected happened. I was out front loading firewood into my truck when a black SUV pulled up. 2 men in suits got out and approached me. "Adam Jennings," one of them asked. "That is me." They showed me badges. FBI. My heart rate kicked up a notch. "We would like to ask you a few questions about Patricia Hendricks. Do you have a few minutes?" I set down the log I was holding. Sure." "What is this about? Can we speak inside?" I led them into my house, my mind racing. What on earth could Patricia have done that would bring the FBI to my door? We sat in my living room, and the agents introduced themselves as Special Agent Barnes and Special Agent Kowalski. Barnes did most of the talking. "Mr. Jennings, we are investigating Patricia Hendricks for potential fraud and embezzlement related to her time as president of the Pine Ridge HOA. Your name came up in our inquiry because you had conflicts with her during her tenure." Embezzlement. I had no idea. "We are still gathering evidence, but we have reason to believe Miss Hendricks misappropriated HOA funds for personal use. We are talking to residents who had interactions with her to build a fuller picture of her activities and behavior." "Can you tell us about your experience with her?" I recounted the whole story about the fireplace fines, the firewood business, and the eventual resolution. The agents took notes and asked follow-up questions. They seemed particularly interested in Patricia's tendency to act unilaterally and her defensive behavior when challenged. "Did you ever notice anything unusual about HOA finances during her tenure?" Kowalski asked. "Not really. I mean, I was not paying close attention." Frank Chen, the treasurer, seemed to have things in order when people asked for documentation. "Mr. Chen has been cooperative with our investigation," Barnes said. "He provided records that raised some red flags, which is part of what led us here." After about 30 minutes, the agents thanked me and left. I sat there for a while, processing what had just happened. Patricia had not just been an overbearing HOA president. She had apparently been stealing money. Over the next few weeks, the FBI investigation became the talk of Pine Ridge. It turned out that Patricia had created fake invoices for landscaping and maintenance work that was never performed. She had then pocketed the money, totaling somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 over 2 years. Frank Chen had noticed discrepancies after Patricia left office and had reported them to the new board. Richard Paulson had contacted authorities, and the investigation had followed. In late January, Patricia was arrested. I watched from my front window as FBI agents led her out of her house in handcuffs. News crews were there, filming the whole thing. It was surreal. The HOA president who had tried to fine me for chimney smoke was now facing federal fraud charges. The legal process took months, but eventually, Patricia pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband, who seemed like a nice guy and had apparently had no idea what she was doing, filed for divorce shortly after her arrest. Life in Pine Ridge returned to a strange kind of normal. Richard Paulson continued to run the HOA competently and without drama. I kept selling firewood to my neighbors, and nobody said a word about my chimney smoke. In fact, I think people appreciated the sight of it more now. It was a symbol of normalcy and the triumph of common sense over arbitrary nonsense. One evening in late March, almost a year after the whole ordeal had started, I sat on my back deck with a beer, watching the sun set over the mountains. Cooper lay at my feet, content and warm. Smoke rose lazily from my chimney, disappearing into the clear sky. Tom Watkins wandered over from his house, carrying his own beer. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Pull up a chair." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just enjoying the evening. "You know, that was quite a year," Tom said eventually. "That is an understatement." Who would have thought Patricia was embezzling the whole time? I mean, she was annoying, but I never pegged her as a criminal. People are full of surprises. You ever regret how you handled the firewood thing? Cutting everyone off, I mean. I thought about it. No, I do not. I think people needed to understand that actions have consequences. Patricia tried to push me around, and I pushed back in the way that made sense to me. If I had just rolled over and paid the fine, she would have kept doing the same thing to other people. Fair enough. And for what it is worth, I think most people get it now. You stood your ground and it worked out. It did. And I learned something too. What is that? That sometimes the best response to unreasonable people is to stop giving them what they want. Patricia wanted power and control. When I stopped playing along, it exposed how little power she actually had. Tom raised his beer. "To standing your ground." I clinked my bottle against his. "To standing your ground." As winter finally gave way to spring, I found myself reflecting on the whole crazy experience. The HOA fine that had started everything seemed almost trivial now in light of Patricia's crimes. But in a way, that fine had been the beginning of the unraveling of her little empire. By pushing back against her overreach, I had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that led to greater scrutiny of her actions, which eventually exposed her fraud. I did not take any pleasure in her imprisonment. Despite everything, I did not wish her ill. But I did take satisfaction in knowing that the neighborhood was better off without her toxic leadership. Richard Paulson and the new board were proof that HOA governance did not have to be a nightmare. It could be reasonable, transparent, and focused on actually serving the community rather than feeding someone's power trip. My firewood business continued to thrive. I had more customers than I could handle, both inside and outside Pine Ridge. I ended up hiring a part-time helper, a college kid named Ethan who needed work during the summer and winter breaks. Together, we kept up with demand and maintained the quality that had made my wood sought after in the first place. The following winter, I noticed something that made me smile. More people in Pine Ridge were using their fireplaces regularly. You could drive through the subdivision on a cold evening and see smoke rising from a dozen chimneys, something that had become less common during Patricia's reign, when people were worried about being fined. It was like the neighborhood had collectively decided to reclaim something that had been taken from them. Jennifer Morrison told me one day that she and Dave had decided to stay in Pine Ridge after all. They had seriously considered moving after the fireplace fine debacle, but with Patricia gone and the HOA functioning normally again, they felt comfortable staying. That meant a lot to me, knowing that my stand against unreasonable rules had contributed to people feeling like they could actually enjoy their homes. In May, the HOA held its annual meeting. Richard Paulson ran for re-election unopposed and won easily. During his speech, he thanked the community for its support and specifically mentioned the importance of residents speaking up when they felt the HOA was overstepping its bounds. "Last year taught us valuable lessons about governance and accountability," Richard said. "We learned that HOAs exist to serve homeowners, not to control them. We learned that rules need to be clear, fair, and enforced consistently. And we learned that when good people stand up for what is right, positive change can happen." People clapped, and several looked in my direction. I was not sure if that was intentional or coincidental, but it felt good either way. I had not set out to be any kind of hero or community leader. I had just wanted to use my fireplace and sell my firewood without being hassled. But sometimes standing up for simple, reasonable things can have bigger ripple effects than you expect. As summer arrived and the need for firewood disappeared until fall, I took some time to improve my property. I built a better road to access the back acreage where I harvested wood. I upgraded my woodshed to increase capacity. I even got a new chainsaw, a professional-grade model that made cutting faster and easier. Cooper aged another year, his muzzle getting a bit grayer, but he was still energetic and happy. He loved being outside while I worked, chasing squirrels and barking at birds. Life was good. Simple, but good. One afternoon in July, I ran into Frank Chen at the hardware store. He had resigned from the HOA board after Patricia's arrest, feeling burned out by the whole experience. But he seemed lighter now, less stressed. "Hey Adam, how is it going?" he asked. "Cannot complain. You, good. I have been meaning to thank you, actually." "For what?" "For not letting Patricia get away with that fireplace smoke nonsense. If you had not pushed back, I do not think the board would have ever questioned her judgment. And if we had not started questioning her judgment, we might never have looked closely enough at the finances to catch what she was doing. In a weird way, you refusing to pay that fine might have saved the HOA from even more theft." I had never thought of it that way, but he had a point. I was just defending my right to use my fireplace. I know, but it mattered. So, thank you. We shook hands, and I left the hardware store feeling oddly validated. I had not been wrong to stand my ground. Sometimes doing the right thing for yourself ends up being the right thing for others too. As fall approached again, and I started preparing for another busy firewood season, I thought about how much had changed in less than 2 years. A neighborhood that had been tense and divided under Patricia's leadership was now peaceful and functional. People trusted the HOA again, or at least did not actively resent it. And I had learned that I was capable of standing up to authority when it was wrong, even if it meant short-term inconvenience. The first cold snap of the season hit in late September, and I fired up my fireplace for the first time in months. The familiar smell of wood smoke filled my house, and I stood outside for a moment watching the smoke rise from my chimney into the crisp evening air. No fines would be coming. No letters of complaint. Just smoke from a fire, doing what it was supposed to do, keeping a house warm as winter approached. My phone buzzed with a text from Dave Morrison, asking if I had firewood available yet. I replied that I would have his first cord ready for delivery by the end of the week. A few minutes later, Jennifer texted asking if they could order 3 cords total for the season. Then Maria Rodriguez messaged asking about availability. Then Tom Watkins. Then others. By the end of the evening, I had orders for 20 cords, all from Pine Ridge addresses. I sat at my kitchen table, making notes and planning my delivery schedule. Cooper lounged nearby, occasionally looking up to make sure I was still there. This was my life now. Cutting and selling firewood, using my fireplace without fear of ridiculous fines. Living in a neighborhood where the HOA actually functioned the way it was supposed to. It was not exciting or glamorous, but it was mine, and I had fought to keep it that way. Looking back, I did not regret stopping firewood sales to Pine Ridge when I did. It had been the right move at the right time, and I did not regret starting again when circumstances changed. Flexibility and principle were not mutually exclusive. You could stand firm when necessary and adapt when appropriate. The years moved forward. Patricia served her time and moved away after her release, relocating to another state to escape the shame of what had happened. Richard Paulson served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down to let someone else take over. The new president was a woman named Sandra Mills, equally competent and drama-free. My firewood business became a fixture in the community. People knew they could count on me for quality wood at fair prices, delivered on time. I never got rich from it, but that was not the point. It was about providing a service, being part of the community, and making a decent living doing something I enjoyed. And every winter, when the cold settled over Montana and smoke rose from chimneys throughout Pine Ridge, I thought about that first fine from Patricia and everything that followed. It had been a bizarre, frustrating, and ultimately enlightening experience. I had learned about standing up for myself, about the importance of community, and about how institutions like HOAs could be either helpful or harmful depending on who was running them. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the best way to fight back against unreasonable authority is not with anger or aggression, but with quiet, firm resistance. By simply refusing to comply with an unjust fine and withdrawing a service that people valued, I had made my point more effectively than any argument or confrontation could have. Actions speak louder than words, and my actions had spoken clearly. As I sat by my fireplace on a particularly cold evening in December, watching the flames dance and listening to the wood crackle, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was my home. This was my community. And this was my life, lived on my own terms within the reasonable bounds of a well-run HOA that respected its residents. Cooper sighed contentedly in his sleep, dreaming whatever dogs dream about. Outside, snow began to fall, coating Pine Ridge in a fresh layer of white. Smoke rose from my chimney and from chimneys throughout the neighborhood, a testament to the simple human need for warmth and comfort during the harsh winter months. And nobody, absolutely nobody, was going to find me for that ever again.